So I watched the full video, the hour-long video of the, I guess, Ninth Circuit Court in Pasadena. I guess it's in Pasadena. But I took some notes and I wrote it down about this. I'm going to title this video basically the same as that video, so maybe it'll come up in the search engine. And I'm just going to put my response or my opinion. And I do want to just jump right into it. But overall, I think that the ruling in this case is going to go against California. I think that I don't know what you call it, the woman, who was, for the people, let's say, I think that her argument was much more solid and she was much more well versed in her opinion. I mean, she spoke passionately about it versus the attorney for the state of California. The attorney for the state of California was just like this, I don't know, type of person that's all about technicalities, but he doesn't really have a passion for the defense. He's just kind of doing his job. And I sense that. And, I guess I'm not saying that passion should win the argument, but I think people have a particular passion about the Second Amendment for a reason, especially now when you see that the Second Amendment is underneath attack. And we have this epidemic right now with the coronavirus that everybody's going through, police stations and departments talking about letting low-level crime or what they consider low-level crime to basically go on because, the government and law enforcement and the courts aren't even open. They're talking about letting prisoners go because, they can't, what is that, habeas corpus? They can't just keep people in court indefinitely, right to a speedy trial and all that. So, I'm just saying the Second Amendment is, it's paramount, in times like these, which is what people who've been talking about prepping in the Second Amendment have always been saying. Anyway, I'm not going to, play the video and then interject. I just wrote some things down as I was listening to the video. I said, this is a good time for me to make some of these, really, really flesh out, some of my counter arguments to some of what I was hearing. And this is in no particular order. I actually ended up adding some stuff later on. But this was getting me about the Second Amendment, about the conversation that they were having. Okay, so the first point I wrote is where the attorney for the state of California said magazines can be stolen. So what I said was, be it that all the surrounding states have magazines over 10 rounds, magazines can be stolen or illegally trafficked into the state of California. Nothing is stopping any criminal from driving into adjacent states to legally or illegally obtain large capacity magazines. What you are suggesting is the limitation of the rights of citizens who are otherwise in lawful possession of their firearms and large capacity magazines because criminals exist. In other words, even with your 10-round magazine ban, nothing is preventing criminals from easily obtaining these large capacity magazines, which they can easily circumvent simply by crossing state lines. Why is the burden of limitation on the law abiding? To put it differently, the state of California is arguing that since any law-abiding person can become a criminal, the law-abiding must be restricted and regulated. This sounds very similar to the feminist extremist argument that all men are potential rapists. Or if you've ever seen the movie X-Men, I think it was X-Men Futures Past or something like that. I think that was the title. In that movie, they had the Sentinels that, were basically designed to eradicate the mutants. But then at some point, the Sentinels turned on humans because the Sentinels, these robotic machines, concluded that, well, the best way to eliminate mutants is to eliminate humans since mutants come from humans. And I could see the same argument being formulated here by the state of California, where it's like, well, since all criminals come from law-abiding people, the best way to deal with criminals is to attack the law-abiding people. You get what I'm saying? So, this is basically, this is the Skynet argument. This is the fear of the AI or some supercomputer becoming self-aware, where it's designed to save humanity or help humanity, and the next thing you know, the machine decides that humanity is the disease and humanity is the plague. You saw the same theme in the movie The Matrix, where humans are the problem and humans are the parasite and humans have to be dealt with, even though the whole design of them was to solve, certain problems for humans, right? So, when it comes to the Second Amendment, I noticed that they keep doing that. They keep attacking the law-abiding citizen as opposed to dealing with the criminals. And now they're making, this sort of big brother argument where it's justifying the idea of absolute and total, control, right? Which is, just completely goes against, what the Constitution is actually for, or what namely specifically the Bill of Rights is for. Number two. The attorney for the state of California said, large capacity magazines can be obtained and used in a variety of firearms. And I said, but California bans all so-called assault weapons and has, hold on, I got a typo here, has a handgun roster list which severely limits and restricts access to the variety of firearms that he speaks of. Part of the problem with these judge panels is that judges know very little about firearms themselves. They know law, but not necessarily firearms and what's actually available. And even though I've seen videos where people are like, these judges sound like they were gun owners, and the two, Lee, and I think it's Lee, and the other lawyer or the other judge that was on the far left sounded like they own firearms. I don't think they are firearms connoisseurs. When you get involved in the Second Amendment, community, and you're actually into guns and you understand that there's all different type of firearms and whatnot. Again, the idea that, there's a variety of firearms to choose from. Well, not in California, not when they got that DOJ, what is it, the DOJ, whatever it is, the handgun roster that severely restricts the handguns that you can buy. Right. All new handguns are not added to the list when they simply meet, some sort of arbitrary California requirement. They're not added to the list. It basically makes it so that you can only have, this list of guns, which makes it very difficult to be able to choose and buy guns, even online, to have them transferred to an FFL in the state of California. There's guns that exist online, many different guns, new, up to date, guns designed in the year 2020 or whatever, that'll never make it to the California roster. And I think that's done intentionally to basically restrict the right into oblivion. And that's the ultimate goal of the state of California, to restrict the right into oblivion, make it as difficult as possible, swear up and down that it's all about, public safety, when they're really just trying to, obliterate the right altogether. Number three, I have, so again, since criminals cannot be controlled and all law-abiding citizens have the potential of becoming criminals, the goal is not to control all law-abiding citizens because of the extreme minority who have the potential of becoming criminals. Or I already said that. Scratch that, because I already said that. The goal is to control, is to control. This is like saying that since men are more prone to violence. All men should be made eunuchs because testosterone has been tied to male violence. So in order to stop violence in society, we must control men. All males are a potential threat. And that goes back to what I said earlier about the feminists. So that's me being redundant. Number 4, anticipation of future regulation. This one is the one that got me, right? Because the lawyer for California, the attorney for California said, they should anticipate future regulation. And they were talking about getting rid of the magazines, magazines not being grandfathered in. So you should anticipate future regulation. And this is what I had to say about that. Okay, so buy it today, legal today, but could be illegal tomorrow. So what's legal today could be further regulated in the future. Okay, so how is the Second Amendment protected? Right? How is the Second Amendment protected if further regulation should be anticipated for the future? Right? And again, it doesn't talk about the extent of that regulation. And so this is what I had to say even further. I say, so in other words, when the political winds change in favor of gun control advocates, the regulations that are too much of a burden today won't be too much of a burden to push for tomorrow. You see? Continuing. Well, doesn't this work in both directions? Shouldn't gun owners who legally possess and acquired their firearms and large capacity. Why did that happen? I don't know why that happened. So in other words, when the political winds change in favor of gun control advocates, the regulations that are too much of a burden today won't be too much of a burden to push for tomorrow. Well, doesn't this work in both directions? Shouldn't gun owners who legally possess and acquired their firearms and large capacity magazines today be able to keep them or keep their items because of the anticipation of future deregulation? Wouldn't the theory work in both directions? So if you're saying you should anticipate future regulation, well, if the political winds change, as we're seeing now, well, shouldn't law-abiding citizens be able to keep their large capacity magazines, since we're using that term, because there might be future anticipated deregulation? Shouldn't it be able to work in both directions? Right? So I thought that argument was very funny, because I was like, oh, so yes, we'll come back and we'll further restrict it down the road, and they should anticipate losing their items that they legally possess because of future regulation. Well, I can make the same argument about future deregulation. Anyway, continuing, number 5. One of the issues that 10-round restriction discussion overlooks is the issue of concealed carry, where oftentimes all the bullets you have are the bullets that are withheld within the handle of the gun. It is hard enough to conceal a full-size firearm, let alone to carry extra magazines. This puts the armed citizen at a distinct disadvantage when it comes to self-defense from concealed carry. So having as many 10-round magazines as you want on your person is not only burdensome, it is also unrealistic to expect citizens, on the rare occasion that they can carry a firearm, which in California is highly unlikely, to conceal what amounts to a police officer's utility belt loaded up with 10-round magazines. 3 magazines of 10 rounds with one in the chamber is less than 2 full capacity magazines, which would be easier to conceal with 35 rounds, including one in the bullet, including one in the chamber. Because if I had a 17 round magazine and one in 17 round magazine in the gun with one bullet in the chamber, that's 18 bullets. If I was to carry just one more magazine, which I can slip into my pocket, now I have a total of 35 rounds, compared to having 3 10-round magazines, which only equates to 30 rounds. You see, it's much more difficult to try to conceal a full-sized firearm and three additional magazines. Or actually, I stand corrected, because that would actually equal 40 rounds. But if I reduce it down to carrying 2 more magazines, which would still be burdensome, you're still only left with 31 rounds, the 10 rounds in the gun, the 10 rounds in your other 2 magazines, and the bullet in the chamber. That's still only 31 rounds. And that means you're having to carry that second magazine. It's burdensome. If I added a third magazine for the 17-round magazine, I would have even more rounds. But how many people, even people carrying a full capacity magazine, are not carrying? Very few people are carrying around that spare magazine. Usually the only time I hear people talking about carrying that spare magazine is when it is a single stack gun, which only typically holds 7 rounds. A lot of people don't feel comfortable with the 7 rounds, which lets you know how uncomfortable people feel with just having 10 rounds. 15 rounds, a lot of people feel comfortable with, because you will find a lot of people that carry a gun the size of a Glock 19 that only has 15 rounds with 1 in the chamber. Now you got 16 rounds. That's a lot better than just having 10. So where am I at? I was incorrect, because I said 3 mags, but I forgot to include the magazine that was in the gun of the 10-round magazine. But like I said, you could easily, adjust that. Obviously, having more bullets in a magazine is easier to conceal than wasted space by having a 10-round magazine with a plastic spacer in there, so you can't put any more rounds in. So what did I say further? I say so I already gave that number. Number 6, when it comes to self-defense, the point is to be able to have the advantages. The point. Okay, let me repeat that. When it comes to self-defense, the point is to be able to have the advantage. This should not be about trying to equalize the fight, as criminals have no restrictions and wouldn't follow restrictions if imposed, going back to the point that the attorney for California made, that criminals will steal magazines. Yes, we are aware of the fact that criminals break laws. Okay, we are, I don't know what word I think ignoring the fact that, hold on one second. Not away, that's a typo. Aware. We are aware of the fact, yes, we are aware of the fact that criminals break laws, which is why defenders need all the advantage that they can get, especially if there are multiple attackers, which is one of the points that one of the judges brought up, the judge on the left. Excuse me, the judge on the left when you're looking at it, but the judge on the left. Let me just go with that. Number 7, mass shooters reloading gives possible victims a better chance of running away during the time of magazine reload, less than 2 seconds, but allow people to carry concealed outside the home in places like Los Angeles and California is off the table. So let me read that again. I got that I could have written that better. So I said mass shooters reloading gives possible victims a better chance of running away during the time of magazine reload, less than 2 seconds, but allow people to carry concealed outside the home in places like Los Angeles is off the table. So this discussion about, mass shooters and magazine reloads and giving them the ability to running away, in that less than 2 seconds, it's so unrealistic. And in a semi-automatic gun, it's so easy to reload, and it takes less than 2 seconds. But what this ignores is, again, when we go back to conceal carry, and it goes back to a law-abiding citizen having more more rounds of ammunition within their gun, within their firearm. So it's always looked at. What gets me is it's always looked at in terms of the the victim getting away from a mass shooter. But a person that legally carries a concealed firearm is never seen as the victim for some reason because they have the firearm. Like in other words, it's okay to give a disarmed person all the advantage in the world. That's why we want to create 10-round magazine limits, because maybe they could get away in that lapse of time in reloading a magazine, which completely ignores the actual time it takes to reload a magazine, which isn't very much. But then when we get to a concealed carry gun owner and a person that's carrying the firearm, it's like the state wants to take all the advantage of the person carrying the firearm away, even though they might be confronted with criminals or multiple criminals with multiple handguns or magazines that hold over 10 rounds in the magazine. You notice that? So if you have no gun at all, the state's willing to give you what they consider an advantage at the expense of the other law-abiding citizen who takes it upon themselves to prepare themselves in the event that a crime were to occur or somebody might violently accost them. It's okay to disadvantage the concealed carry holder over the unarmed, civilian who chooses not to, go the route of carrying a firearm. And I find that very strange. I'm like, well, aren't they the same? Aren't they one and the same? They're both law abiding. Is one person's life more valuable than the other? Is the unarmed civilian's life more valuable than the armed civilian's life? Why create restrictions on the law-abiding person? The lawyer already stated for the state of California. He already stated that criminals are not going to follow the law. He already stated, well, they're going to steal large capacity magazines. As though the only way that for criminals to acquire large capacity magazines is stealing them from law abiding citizens in the state of California. I'm like, all he's got to do is drive to what? Nevada, drive to what's next to California? I don't know my states. What is it? Wyoming, Utah. What's next to California? I mean, there's plenty of states that are next to California, Arizona, that people drive into to get what they need and then drive back into the state of California. I mean, it's not like state of California created this big giant wall of China around the state of California. As soon as quote unquote Freedom Week happened and people were able to go and buy quote unquote large capacity magazines, and all they did was drive across state lines in Arizona. That's what all the law abiding people did. So when we go and we look at the criminals, it's like, well, criminals do that all year round because they're criminals. So there's nothing preventing criminals from getting large capacity magazines. We have the same problem in the state of New Jersey, where Governor Murphy, a liberal governor, came in and we went from 15 rounds to 10 rounds. And I'm like, well, if I wanted to commit a mass shooting, there's nothing stopping me from driving into the state of Pennsylvania or driving into Delaware if I was this, wannabe, Jersey mass shooter, and get what the magazines that I want in these states that are unrestricted. And see, this is why Democrats want to make the argument of trying to get everybody to do what they want. Right. This is why we need a federal assault weapons ban. Right. Because even though we're in the minority, even though we don't want to recognize concealed carry, we want the whole rest of the United States to do what we do so that we can feel safe. But then when you go into other areas, and I'm getting political now, but when you go into other areas and you start talking about like things like national reciprocity and getting the liberal states to be in league with all of the more conservative states. Oh, no, states' rights. It's all about states' rights. But when they're trying to create a federal assault weapons ban or a federal magazine ban, Georgia's like, states, not Georgia's, states like Georgia or Florida or whatever other states that have less restrictive gun laws, they can't jump up and say states' rights. You see, it's like liberals want to push, state. I'll say this: both sides like to push states' rights when it's convenient. But it's just funny how liberals now all of a sudden, when it comes to defending their gun laws, it's states' rights. But then when it comes to federal gun bans, they say, well, everybody should get on board and everybody should be in league with what we're about. And then I have number 8. So number 7 was poorly worded. I should have wrote that differently. Number 8 is regardless of the average shots fired being 2.3. I think that's what they said. In a defensive situation, this tells of nothing. This tells nothing about how many rounds are needed to incapacitate a criminal. Most civilians carry 9mm, while most police carry 40 caliber, which is a bigger and more powerful bullet. People could argue shot placement is more important than the controversial term stopping power, but any number of recorded police-involved shootings will demonstrate where it took sometimes half a magazine or more from a 15-round 40 caliber gun to stop or incapacitate a threat. I mean, we've all seen these videos where, I think there was a video. It was I forget what state it was, but there was an Asian guy. And he came out with a knife and he was like, "Kill me, kill me!" And then he came running at the cop, and then he got a hold of one of the cops, and the partner had to, after they put a bunch of rounds in him, he was still coming. He got a hold of the other cop, and then the cop basically had to shoot him at point blank range as he had his partner in a headlock. I'm sure many of you all, it was in a suburb, they walked all the way up the street. The cops were so trying not to shoot this guy. And he was like, kill me, and he came running at the cops, and the cops shot him multiple times. And then he was still able to get close to the other cop. And they tried to pepper spray him, or they used something. It was either tase, pepper spray, or the beanbag. They tried it all, and they weren't able to stop the guy. So then the cop ended up shooting him, and he was still coming. And when you watch the video, it took him. It's got to be more than 9 shots that he put in this guy to get him to stop. And so, this idea that, you only need 10 rounds. And then, like one of the judges said, well, what if you miss? And then what I don't hear being brought up is the aspect of incapacitation. Just because a criminal is shot does not mean that they're going to stop and drop and fall dead on the floor. Again, there's numerous police videos that can be pulled up easily on YouTube. And I don't know why this argument is not presented more often. There's numerous videos where the cops, there's some knife wielding attacker, and they run at the police officer, and the cop has to put multiple rounds in the individual before they drop and they hit the ground. It's not just one shot. And oftentimes when the cop does show some level of restraint and shoots the person one time, they stumble, they get back up, and they're still coming. So this idea that movies have that you only need one bullet, and I think that's part of the problem, is everything comes from the movies. Everything people know about guns who aren't familiar with guns comes from movies. Where everybody's just running around fully automatic, silencers or sound suppressors go pew, 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 and nobody can hear it. And it's the weapon of assassins, where, if you've actually shot a suppressed firearm, it's still pretty loud. It's just under the threshold of being, of damaging your hearing. but it doesn't go pew, 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 unless you're maybe shooting a 22 that's soft, but that's like one of the weakest calibers that exist. It's like a squirrel gun. But, trying to silence a fully, a full size, cartridge like 9mm 45 ACP or 40 caliber is not, it's not easy like that. So you get these people that have these misconceptions because they watch all these sorts of movies and believe the hype. But that's pretty much my list. That's pretty much all I have to say about it. I'm sure people will take bits and pieces and say, hey, that's a good argument, and then run with that, and that's a good thing, because I think that again, as somebody who strongly believes in the Second Amendment, I think that, Second Amendment advocates do need to become better debaters and better at being able to smack down some of these erroneous talking points that anti-gunners and gun control advocates espouse. And, I think that, some of us out here, and I'm not saying just myself, but some of us out here are better at being able to go for the jugular and articulate better arguments. And I think that, there's no shame in other people, grabbing those arguments and run with it. I see people running with canned responses all the time. But if you're going to come with a canned response, meaning an idea that you didn't come up with, then you got to come up with something better than from my cold dead hands. You got to come up with something better than it's my right. You got to come up with something better, than, people don't kill people, guns kill people. You got to come up with some better arguments than that. You got to intellectualize and break down the specific point that they're trying to address. You go point for point. You do not just say, it says shall not infringe. I see comments like that all the time, in these gun debate discussions, and people come in the comment section and they think that they're saying something profound, and they're not saying anything profound. You gotta work on articulating a better argument. If they say this, then your response should pertain to that response. Okay. So you use the points that they're making against them. Just as I used the point about, well, criminals can steal magazines. I'm like, okay, so basically you're telling me that regardless of whatever law you pass, criminals will continue to break the law. Okay, well, that's my argument against why these laws are ineffective and why your laws are nothing more than a burden unto law-abiding citizens. And I know what the response is going to be. Well, we could make it harder, for the criminals, to be able to commit crimes, right? Because that's the argument. And I want to make one more point. People keep acting like, and I'm saying people keep acting like there's this, in one breath, people will make it seem like there's this thing of career criminals. Like when they talk about a population, they'll be like the criminals. Criminals don't abide by the law. Right. And it's a true statement, but it's not really intellectually honest in the fact that, yes, law abiding citizens do become criminals. Yes, that's true. Then by the same token, then you get the other people that will make the argument, that being the argument that law abiding citizens become criminals. And then they argue that, well, we're not here to restrict the criminals. We're here to restrict the law-abiding people who may become criminals. So then it becomes a big brother argument about what you might potentially do, right? And that's not how it's supposed to operate in a free society. In a free society, like I said before, all of us have driver's licenses. What is stopping us from driving, seeing a crowd of people and driving our cars into a crowd of people? Nothing. As Muslim extremist terrorists have shown us, there's nothing stopping you from running over a crowd of people. It's just people just don't do that. You know what I mean? And we're not talking about taking away everybody's licenses. because there is the potential for somebody to recklessly drive into a crowd of people. We're not talking about taking away of everybody's licenses because drunk drivers exist and there's the potential for people to abuse, drunk driving, right? I mean, how do we deal with drunk drivers? If you're caught drunk driving, you get what? A ticket. You go to court. You get a fine. If you're a habitual drunk driver, you risk being thrown in jail. We prosecute these people for committing the crime. We don't take everybody else's rights away because you get a few assholes that don't know how to behave. I mean, that's just the reality of it. And even still, we recognize the people want to say that driving is a privilege. It's not a right. But yet and still, even when it comes to drunk drivers, we somehow seem to understand that they have a need, a necessity to go to work and make a living. Even after you have somebody who has, the drunk driving, they crashed the car and all that other stuff. What will the state do? We're going to have to put a breathalyzer on your vehicle, but yet you're still allowing them to drive. You see, you've regulated the person that committed the crime. You didn't go and you don't say everybody should have a breathalyzer on their car, but that is tantamount to what the Californian laws are trying to do. We're going to regulate all the law-abiding people. We're not going to prosecute, the criminals. This is about saving lives. It's not about saving lives. This is about restricting law-abiding people. And what it ignores is law-abiding people who, recognize that, when it comes to being in danger, they are the first responders. And for some reason, the state does not take into consideration those people who want to be able to protect themselves. It always focuses on, all the people because that's the majority of the population. Most people don't own firearms. Most people are scared of firearms. So what liberals bet on is they bet on the idea that, I can, guns are scary. Most people fear them. Most people don't want to own them. So we can just push the gun owners aside. We can just push them aside, right? Even though what we're doing makes it more difficult for the people who want to defend themselves from defending themselves, right? But it's never seen as reducing my magazine from 17 rounds to 10 rounds makes me less effective in defending myself, right? What it does is it makes mass shooters less effective in killing lots of people. Yeah, and it also has the effect of making me less effective of a self-defender. I mean, I see the same argument when it comes to, how, you need training for that. I'm so sick of you need training to handle a firearm. And I'll tell you why I'm so sick of it. Not that I don't believe in training to handle a firearm, but I'm sick of it because of the fact that, oftentimes when you'll see liberals make their arguments against, assault weapons or, any sort of semi-automatic weapon or whatever, they'll say that, these guns need to be banned because they make a person a lethal killing machine, a super efficient, super effective lethal killing machine, right? Adam Lanza didn't have any training. He wasn't a firearms expert, but he was a super lethal killing machine because the AR-15 in his hands made him a super lethal killing machine. But then let you be a person that wants to get their concealed carry permit and be able to defend yourself with California's stupid 10-round magazine restrict. Oh, you're going to need all type of training and only police officers should have that. You don't know what you're doing with the firearm. How is it that Adam Lanza can become a super lethal, efficient killing machine just by simply picking up the gun that he really doesn't know much about, right? The boy is half, mentally retarded. And yet when it comes to law-abiding citizens, we get treated like children. Yeah, I want to be able to have a gun to protect my. Yeah, I know you got these ridiculous 10 rounds. I'll take the 10 rounds. I just want to be able to carry the gun for personal protection. Oh, you're going to need training for that. Okay, well, how do I get training? Well, you have to train. You have to have 16 hours of live fire training, which will cost you approximately $800. But it has to be from a state licensed or state appointed firearms instructor who's going to be charging you out the nose, by the way. Aside from all of the ammunition that you will have to purchase yourself, which you can't get online anymore in the state of California because, they don't want people, you got to go through a background check to get ammo. So if you do import it from out of state online, instead of it coming to your doorstep, it has to go strictly to an FFL, and then you got to run a background check, which is going to cost you more money. And then on top of that, you have whatever the fee is for the store to be able to make their money off of the transfer and all that. And so now that box of ammunition that may have only cost you $100 for 500 rounds of 9mm now costs you $150 on top of whatever other stupid taxes that they're trying to put on ammunition, which I already know is coming down the California pipeline, right? So in one breath you say, well, we want people to have better training and more training for firearms, even though Adam Lanza can become a super efficient, killing machine just by touching, an AR-15. But you tell everybody else, okay, we don't want you having an AR-15, okay, because they're dangerous and you don't know what you're doing. But okay, you can have this handgun. We really don't want you having that either, and we're restricting you to 10 rounds. But you need to have training and 16 hours of training and all this other stuff and all these other pre-requirements, right? But we really don't want you to have that. So on top of that, we're going to throw justifiable need and justifiable cause, but ignoring that and making it so that I can make my argument. Okay, let's say there is no justifiable need and justifiable cause, and they let you have, a firearm to have. Then we're going to make it prohibitively expensive for you to train with the ammunition that you've bought, okay, or the ammunition that hopefully you won't be able to afford, so you won't even go through this whole process. Even though we're telling you that we want you to become more efficient with firearms, or that you need to become more efficient with firearms, we're going to make it so that that's very difficult for you to be able to do. So again, they're talking out of both sides of their face. These liberals talk out of both sides of their face. We want you to get training, but we're going to make it prohibitively expensive for you to get training, or for you to stay proficient with your firearm, even though we make arguments all the time that it's all about public safety. I'm saying, if everybody was able to walk around with a firearm, right? Let's get rid of the California ban on concealed carry. Let's say they got rid of justifiable need and justifiable cause, and California became a shall issue state, right? You would think that you would want people to be as proficient as possible when it came to the use of their firearm. But California, even now, and even like Jersey's trying to do the same thing, to put these taxes on ammunition so that what people practice less and become less efficient. Again, if criminals can steal magazines, criminals can yet again drive right across the border into other states and purchase ammunition elsewhere without having to go through California's background check and whatever extra fees are tacked on top of that, and just simply drive it back into the state. Now, I know that California's been sending, cops into the state of California, other states outside of California, which I think is just, you want to talk about, oppression. You know what I'm saying? We're going to go out here. And most of the people that they're getting are people who would, they're not career criminals. These are people that otherwise would be law abiding, but it's like they're forced into having to go that route, not because they're trying to circumvent the law, but because the laws have become so draconian and so oppressive that, they're looking at it like, I can't afford this. I'm just throwing money away. And again, that is California. That is the liberal agenda's goal, is to make the practicing and the exercise of the Second Amendment so onerous that nobody's willing to participate in it. It costs so much just to get in the game. And I don't know why, as an African American, why there aren't more African Americans that bitch and complain about this. We all know why the Mulford Act was enacted, because the Black Panthers marched on the Capitol with open carry weapons. And so when we're talking about things being cost prohibitive, the first group of people that it affects due to the economic longstanding inequality in this country are African Americans. And I don't understand why, when it comes to firearms, we're so anti-Second Amendment. We always complain about racism, police brutality, the history of slavery and Jim Crow. We always complain about that stuff. But yet, we don't see how, again, due to the economic disparities in America, if politicians really want to keep guns out of the hands of black people, all they have to do is say, well, we're just going to tax it to death. And in my opinion, that's an undercover way of engaging in racial discrimination. But nobody sees it like that, because for some reason in America, in this capitalist society, it's not okay to discriminate against people racially. That has already been established. But it's perfectly okay to discriminate against people economically. And the people who typically are most affected by a raise in prices economically are African Americans and arguably, other minority groups. Right. And I know people are going to say, oh, but all the violence is in the black community. You're right. All the violence is in the black community. But I tie that directly back to the economic disparity that exists in the black community. Anywhere you go where people are poor, you're going to have more crime. Just as right now you have everybody's out of work. And why is everybody running to the gun store right now? Because they fear civil unrest. Why? Why are you fearing it? If it's all about, and here I get on my soapbox, but if it's all about, culture and behavior and whatnot, why is it that everybody's jumping up and down and fearing, this civil unrest? You mean to tell me that if, good white folks go without food for a couple of days, that people might have to worry about their neighbors? Impossible, because white culture doesn't advocate violence. Again, according to some of the people that, espouse this sort of racial drivel of genetic black violence or something like that. I'm like, again, people are, see, once you create a situation or a circumstance where people are in desperation and despair, they go into survival mode. Survival mode trumps, morality and this sort of, social cohesion that exists when the world allows people to, live to their full, positive contributing to society potential. But once you take all that away, now you see how, with this whole coronavirus pandemic, now you see how, conditions change people's behavior, and how now people are worried about, well, what's going to happen if, everything in the world is being disrupted? Well, what happens if the flow of food, gets disrupted? That's the one thing that, you can take away a whole bunch of other stuff before you take away food. And you could get people to hunker down, say, hey, things are going to be on the down, for a while. So just chill, stay at home. People will do that. The states are coming through, saying that people can't be evicted, and they're shutting, preventing, mortgages from being collected and everything. So it's like, OK, all right, I'm not working, but I don't have to pay my mortgage and I don't have to worry about the rent. OK, cool. But again, if you start taking away the food, if the food, is not getting to people, again, you're going to see savagery on a level that you never thought existed. That is human behavior. And there's certain people who recognize this right now. There's certain people who are majorly looking at the logistics of, food shortages and things like that, and the type of impact it would have, because they're talking about, us, having this whole, pandemic, 10 to 12 weeks. That's what the federal government is. That's a long time. That's 3 months. That's not 1 month. That's 3 months. So we're looking at, so it started in March. We're looking at, sometime towards the end of June that this is going to be going on. So you can forget about your what was that, Memorial Day. You can forget about all that. It's not happening. You see? So I'm just saying, people talk about me, incorporating the why does this thing keep looking like it's talking or listening to me every time I'm speaking? You can talk about, people, they feel some type of way when I bring up the racial component, but I think I've explained my point, very clearly on that subject, as it pertains, trying to get people to understand, why I say many of the things that I say. And you're seeing it now. People worry, they worried now. Yeah, because now for the first time, you have large groups of people who were in that, upper echelon, upper crust of society that were living good and eating good and everything else. You have large groups of people that now, it's essentially we're all in the same boat. And now people are worried about, the behavior of other people. But I just wanted to add that, and I don't want to go on and on, but I just wanted to say that about, this whole thing, because, when it comes to firearms, a lot of this stuff, it is about self-preservation, but it's also about examining human behavior. And a lot of these erroneous arguments that people try to make about, these convenient arguments where people, well, these people have a potential or a propensity to violence, or they have the potential to become criminals or become this. And I'm like, I always try to point out to a lot of white folks that, the same arguments that a lot of times I see them label against African Americans are the same arguments that anti-gunners label against them. It's the same thing. Oh, well, we don't trust you with a gun. We think that you're going to act in such and such a way. We're talking about mass shooters. I mean, let's face the fact that when we're talking about mass shooters, we're typically not talking about African Americans. We're just not, and so here you have this minority of people who are ruining it for the masses. And the same thing can be said about the thugs in the black community that are ruining it for the masses of black people when people want to come up and formulate those type of arguments. You know what I mean? It's like, again, one of the things that was brought up during this whole court hearing is, they asked the woman lawyer, who's, for the people, whether they thought that there was any merit to the argument, basically the concern of public safety as it pertains to mass shootings. And there most certainly is. It wasn't like there's absolutely no concern there. But you see how the gun control advocates will take the validity of that concern and then try to make it such a compelling argument that, we must therefore deny everybody their Second Amendment rights. Because, isn't this a valid point, right? Doesn't this argument merit validity, or have validity to it? And then they run with it. Yes. Now that you agree with me that mass shootings are a problem, now we must discuss what reasonable restrictions we can put in place. They love that word reasonable. Ain't nothing reasonable about it. What reasonable restrictions we can put in place, to limit, the Second Amendment right from law-abiding citizens, because we already acknowledge that criminals are just going to break the law. But since criminals either get their guns from legal gun owners or legal gun owners turn into criminals, that is where we must focus our efforts on regulating the law-abiding people to the point that there's essentially no distinguishing between the law-abiding and the criminal. And this has always been the problem with the gun control arguments. But anyway, I don't want to make this video too long. I've made all my points. How long-winded I can get. But anyway, that's all I got to say. That is my video. New Jersey self-defense, New Jersey gun laws out.